I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit. So feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues. And politics, Bible, theology, philosophy, or whatever else in relationship to those issues. Today is Friday, and I kind of, on Fridays, take something that's going on in the comment section and kind of use it as a springboard to talk about. And today I want to talk about a comment that somebody made at the end, and actually this is a very recent comment, and it's like less than an hour old. But it struck me so much that this is something interesting that this person couldn't see in the Bible. And we've been having a discussion on morality, and I made the comment earlier that if you want arbitrary and capricious, we're talking look no further than the Ten Commandments. It's complete. The Bible's ethics is completely about obedience. And the response was this. You're talking about culture here. So what is good and evil is therefore culturally determined. What do you do when this conflicts with the position of what is good and what is beneficial? When culture regards something as good, which in your view is not beneficial? Do you really believe that the biblical position about ethics is about rule keeping? I can hardly believe it. I don't think this is how the law was meant to function even back then. As you probably are aware, it has a relationship which has to do with relating to God and your neighbor in the right way. Ethics could culturally accommodate to agree, but these could still be based on objective principles such as love for God and love for your neighbor. But it will also have to counter cultural then and now. If cultural norms conflict with these principles, I take your comment in the early also biblical resulting in being arrested to be hyperbolic. I'm not saying that you should go over for interpretation. I just don't recognize the biblical mention you're criticizing here above or elsewhere. Okay. I want to be very blunt here. The entirety of the Bible starts with a story of a couple that disobeys God and reaps the consequences of it. Throughout the Bible, the issue is obedience. Obedience to God's commands, period. That is arbitrary, okay? I'm sorry, when you read the law, the entire thing is you're going to obey the commands of God, and that's going to make you different than the cultures around you, and that's so that everybody can see that you're different. There are certain dictates in the Bible that if you did follow them, you would be arrested today. If, in the United States, for instance, you were a father who had a daughter, and that daughter was raped, and the guy who raped her comes up to you and pays you money to take her as his wife, that is perfectly biblically acceptable. That's an arbitrary dictate. If you did that today, you would end up dead. If you, like Abraham, thought that God was telling you to sacrifice your son, you would take him and bind him, put him on an altar, raise the knife, and drive it down if he didn't stop you. Throughout the Bible, obedience is mentioned over and over and over. You mention love of God, but the love of God in the Bible is connected with obedience. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, is what Jesus directly says to his disciples. That love is expressed by being obedient to the commands of God. If you're not seeing that, I don't know what Bible you're reading. You have the Adam and Eve story that starts with they disobeyed, they faced the consequences. You have the story of Noah, where people became so wicked and so disobedient to whatever commands God had. We don't have any example of it, but God must have had an arbitrary standard of what wickedness was. When you have this objective morality, you have arbitrariness. Objective standards cannot change. If it's an objective morality, it does not change, okay? And at that point, you are left with inflexibility if culture changes. You seem to be hung up on this idea that somehow it's wrong to have subjective standards based on culture. But what is beneficial? We've had this discussion, Fat One, about what is beneficial, but you seem to think in your head that what is beneficial should be beneficial to everyone. And that's not true. I'm sorry, I've dealt with trade issues many times. It's something I know about. But what people want, say, in a business trade agreement is completely different. And that's true morally. There are a lot of questions that are just always going to be ambiguous. You want a hard, fast answer, and that's not the world we live in. Okay, you can live in objective reality without having objective moral acting, because objective reality is constantly changing. The one thing you objectively may get to notice around is that things keep changing. But let's go back to the Bible for a minute here. And I say that because in the Bible, you don't have that. If God gives a command and somebody disobeys it, the punishment is often harsh. And there is no subjectiveness of what that person needed. It doesn't matter. The guy, they're at Jericho. God tells them to kill everybody and destroy everything. The one guy takes stuff because he's like, I might need this money. I don't know what's going on. And I need, his needs are irrelevant because if he didn't obey, so he ends up dead, him and his whole household. There's an interesting moral dilemma for you, that all these innocent people die under the dictates of God's commands because one person screwed up. The whole idea of God punishing generation after generation for one person's sin is about as unjust and immoral as you can get. My subjective morality can even pick that up. But this notion that you have that the Bible isn't about obedience as a central tenet of his ethics, what Bible are you reading? We literally have an entire Bible about commandments. You go through even the law of Moses, you get to Deuteronomy, and it's about a blessing and cursing. If you obey God, hooray, you get blessed. If you don't obey God, boo, you get curses. The entire reinforcement of obedience starts right from Adam and Eve to Noah. You don't want to become wicked, so you better obey God. To the Tower of Babel, you need to spread out and fill the earth and subdue it, and you didn't do that, so therefore I'm going to confound your languages as a punishment, which has led to more conflicts than I can care to think about. You better obey God, even if it means sacrificing your own son, because you don't want to disobey God and not sacrifice your own son. I mean, all the way through. The children of Israel. I mean, come on. Come on, man. They get out. They get the commandments. They mean it, and people die. The constant Bible is constant reinforcing the ethic. You better obey God or there's going to be consequences. The kingdom period. When you have good kings and bad kings, the Bible's messages, the bad king led them into moral ambiguity, and so therefore they got their asses whooped by their neighbors. This king righteous and so they were able to stand up against their neighbors. The whole thing is obedience from start to finish. Ecclesiastes, the conclusion when all has been said is this. This is the great philosophical work from supposedly King Solomon. His entire conclusion for the meaning of life is to fear God and do what he tells you. The entirety of the Bible is built upon obedience and reinforcing obedience to God, regardless of whether or not those commands make sense in that particular situation. Doesn't matter. Love is directly equated by Jesus Christ as obedience to his commandments. If you love me, obey my commandments. There is no separation of love and obedience in the New Testament. I challenge you to find it. If you've missed that, you've been turning a blind eye trying to keep your idea of objective reality intact, objective morals intact, and somehow want to not say that by doing so, you're going to end up with arbitrary and capricious commands, because that's exactly what happens. The entirety of the Old Testament law is arbitrary. It's the dictates of a king, and there's no way to get out of it. If come on, man. You have a story in the law itself of a guy who went and picked up sticks on the Sabbath, and he gets nuked. He gets stoned. Okay? How is that not an ethic of obedience. How is it not that? You can think that all you want, and it doesn't change anything. Now, I want to talk about the superiority of subjective ethics, because some of your other comments seem to indicate a couple of problems. Number one, what is beneficial is subjective. It's purely subjective. You see this every day when you shop. The one thing economics taught me very quickly was what is valuable to somebody is subjective. And that's true in moral questions too. What moral weight we put to an issue greatly depends on whether or not it has some sort of benefit to us personally, and benefit is purely subjective. What is beneficial? You seem to be getting caught up on this idea that somehow what is beneficial is going to be the same for everybody, and that's not going to be the case. Well, that necessitates subjective ethics. You can't have a debate with somebody about morality and not somehow realize that certain moral standards are worth more to some people and worth less to others. This happens all the time. Okay? I mean, if you are a person that looks at the issue of, say, stem cell research for treatment of diseases, if you're not affected by those diseases, that moral question becomes a little bit clearer to you, because you just yeah, it's wrong because, they're using whatever, for their research, and, pro-lifers don't like it because it's using stem cells from, aborted fetuses or whatever else. The problem, of course, is once you have one of those diseases, suddenly that moral question becomes a little bit more subjective, doesn't it? It's a little bit more ambiguous, because here's a treatment that could probably save your ass. But if you're going to hold to a hard, arbitrary standard that, God is pro-life, which I don't think he is, and he doesn't want you to do this, then you're going to die, because you wouldn't consider the subjectivity of that moral and ethical questions. You're making the mistake in thinking that as we ask these moral questions, they're hard. They're not. It's not a hard thing. There's a soft side to morals and ethics, where in a specific situation, one course of action might be true, but in another, no, you better not do that, because we're constantly weighing the cost and benefit of things. This is just the nature of human beings. And that's why subjective ethics is far superior than believing this objective moral ethics. Because, yeah, sure, certain things like murder and rape and other things, the human race as a general whole has said, yeah, fuck that shit. But there are other issues where what is beneficial is relative. It is not hardcore objective what is beneficial to everybody. What is beneficial to me in one situation may not be beneficial to me in another. And once you begin to understand that, you begin to realize that moral ambiguity is always going to be a part of us. You seem to not be wanting to accept that, fat one. But I hate to break the news to you, you live in the world of moral ambiguity. And it's not because there's not some sort of attempt at creating an objective standard, but objective morality is not the way human beings live. They just don't. And what is beneficial is constantly changing. It is not a one-size-fits-all. That's just reality. And if you really have the view that the biblical God isn't about obedience, I wonder what Bible you've been reading. Every story seems reinforces obedience to the commands of God. All the people of Israel weren't, the kingdom of Judah wasn't obeying the voice of the Lord, and they were still worshiping him. And so God brought consequences on them. And they faced the curse. The whole thing, the whole ethics is about be obedient or else. The book ends that way, for God's sake. What does the book of Revelation end with? Who goes to the lake of fire? The disobedient, all disobedient. The entirety of the moral and ethical position of the Bible is this: there is a God and you better obey him or else. And you not only that, you need to obey him and love him while you're doing it, or else. The whole idea of the afterlife in Christianity, that there's some sort of major consequence for disobeying God forever and ever, That's reinforcing obedience. Obedience over and over and over. Even love is connected with obedience by Jesus Christ. That is the ethics of the Bible. I'm not trying to, but your comment kind of struck me as completely odd for somebody like me who's read the Bible many times, who's studied it, who's looked at it. Sorry, the thread that goes through the Bible, all the way through it, and it's a thick thread, is obey or else. And if I can't convince you of that, and the Bible can't convince you of that, I guess I don't know what else to do. I want to deal with the comment of the day on my deconversion story, which is getting a crap ton of airplay again. I don't know what's going on there, but a lot of people are reading it or watching it again. And just for those of you that have watched the deconversion story and you're hearing this video, I have a whole playlist of my deconversion studio. I actually redid it a year later, and then I've added a couple chapters onto that where I deal with specific issues where it was involved in my deconversion. But Aloha Oharna, I hope I'm getting that right. I'm probably going to butcher that name. I butcher names all the time. But from one struggling person to another, does Luke 8:13 haunt you? Haunts me like a specter of judgment looming over me. I felt this. I did comment to you and gave you an answer, Aloha, but I'm going to add that a major deconversion issue for a lot of people and is the fear of judgment. And it's something emotionally it takes a while to get this goes with the whole obedience thing I talked about earlier with that one. The issue for me is that because obedience and fear of punishment are intertwined, these are very strong negative emotions that guilt and fear and sadness are things that religion tap into. Regret. Okay, if you had a decision you regretted, the religion's going to label it as sin, and so now it's even worse. Not only did it have negative consequences to you, then God hates you for it too, because you weren't obedient. Emotionally, it is the most difficult thing to get over, and to me, it's the most damning thing about religion, because out of that fear pretty much flows every other bullshit thing that religion does. And for a lot of us who grew up in, I grew up in a fundamentalist Pentecostal church. And the fear of hell, the fear of punishment by God, the fact that God was always looking over my shoulder, ready to zap me if I did anything wrong. I mean, we had that thing coupled with the discussion of God as love. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you straight, this connection of love and being obedient or else is a real sadomasochistic relationship. It's, putting the collar around your neck and getting on your knees before God and saying, yes, sir, master, sir. And I don't mean to be offensive with that statement other than to say that is the mentality. It's funny how many Christians will be against slavery, but then volunteer for a slavery. Even Paul said it, Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ. And that's what that is designed to do. And when you have that reinforced psychologically over and over again in your religion, that way of thinking in your brain, I'm looking at some material about how the brain develops. And the strongest things we have in our brain are the things that are reinforced synaptically over and over. Well, let's say you deconvert or you get out of that situation that fires those synapses. Sometimes they'll just fire for no goddamn good reason. And you'll have that feeling of fear again. And it takes a while for that to reshape and reform into something else because it's been conditioned for so long. And for a lot of us that are deconverted, the fear of judgment is the last thing that goes away. Belief in God, yeah, that's bullshit. Salvation, sin, bullshit. But the fear of punishment, reinforced over and over and over and over and over again, between the Bible and our churches. It's that you must obey or else, over and over and over again. And the or else is such a fear that it imprints it on our brains and on our lives and on the way we conduct ourselves. And it's hard to get over. And I think mine started to really, truly disappear the moment I started this channel. And the moment I started to be an active voice in, yeah, all this theism shit, it's bullshit. Okay? And the moment I began to say it out loud and reinforce the reality of it in my head, the less fear I have of that. I actually talk in deconversion circles about the bliss of the oblivion of death now, because this world sucks. And as much as it sucks sometimes, I still get a lot of good out of it. I still enjoy it. I love the challenge of it. But there's going to come a day where I'm not going to physically be able to fight against this world anymore. And the way things are. And you know what? I'm good with that. I am very good with the notion of the same reality being before I was born, there was no reality for me. And that will become true again. Okay, I will have lived in this world. Hopefully I've left some sort of legacy that people can follow for a while. And then I'll be gone. And I'm okay with that. Okay, but it took me a while to be okay with that. And it's the one reason why I think people cling to religion still. They want to believe that they're going to survive death. Death is kind of the ultimate fuck you. And that's something that people don't want to accept. So they cling to religion and religious beliefs thinking, yeah, no matter what happens, I'm going to survive this. No, you're not. And that's the grim, hard reality. And it's a hard thing to face. It really is. But yes, fear of judgment, yeah, that's reinforced by the Bible over and over again. So it naturally follows that any religion that follows the Bible is going to reinforce that as well. And that ethic leads to a lot of fear, a lot of manipulation, and a lot of garbage that even after you deconvert, it sticks with you. I want to thank everybody for stopping by today. I appreciate all the comments and things that are going on. Just continue to like, subscribe, and do the things you do. Everything you do helps the channel, and I appreciate it. And hopefully someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.